So, Mallory, welcome to the show.
Thanks
Appreciate
so
having
much.
you here. And you and I were talking prior to you sitting down a little bit about Social Security, and I was stunned when you told me this because I knew absolutely nothing about unionizing and Social Security. That I never put the two words together. Keeping in mind that I'm a member of a union. I'm an AFL-CIO guy with AFTRA and SAG.
So you have to realize that the private sector unions started declining. So the union movement had to find new sources of revenues and income.
The private sector meaning business and all of those things. Public sector meaning government.
Right. So what they did is they started organizing government employees.
What year was this? When did this start?
It started a long time ago, but there was an executive order by President Kennedy in '62.
Okay, so in the 60s.
Right.
Because Franklin Delano Roosevelt warned against this, didn't he?
So did George Meany, who was a famous labor leader, AFL-CIO. He said you can't negotiate. Said unions can't negotiate with government.
Right. So
that didn't stop them.
So in the 60s, it started to turn, and they're unionizing the government sector.
Yeah, and today even though government employees are not anywhere near as large as the private sector. I mean, it's 1/6 or 1/5. I mean, what you're looking at is something like 41% now that are under union control. The number of union members in the government sector is larger than the private sector. To give you just some idea of the magnitude, if you look at the entire auto industry, we have a lot of union members in it. We have 219,000 union members. In just the post office alone, we have 477,000 union members.
My Lord.
That's 2 to 2.5 times as much.
So what you're saying is that unions are beginning to take over the government. It's not the government taking over unions.
See, it's really.
I mean, I'm trying to look at this from a senior's perspective too. How does this affect my life?
Well, it affects your life in that the government employee unions are shutting out all sorts of benefits that could go to seniors, and it's going to put an enormous pressure on seniors. Government employee unions are really tax-funded. They're tax-funded organizations. The taxpayer funds these, and what it consists of is coercion, corruption, violence, secrecy, special waivers, backroom deals, feather bedding, and they do nationwide classroom indoctrination. What we try to do is we try to show what's happening. Now, they're starting to max out slowly in the government sector, so they're looking for new ways of getting revenues.
What do you mean max out in the government sector? They're running out of employees to
unionize,
unions?
and they put so much pressure on them, on the government sector, by ballooning it, by forcing wages up.
So now they've pretty much run out of their own people, and now they're moving to what?
Well, they're looking to organize anybody who receives benefits from government.
How can they do that?
Well, how could they organize teachers? I mean,
I don't know. I honestly don't.
The National Education Association, which is the largest union today,
right,
in America.
Yes.
The National Education Association started out similar to an AARP. It was just an association.
You know, it's very funny. I was going to ask somebody the other day. I said, I know teachers are unionized, but when did this happen? What year? What time? What brought it on?
Well,
you know?
Yeah, it happened because the government and because these traditional labor unions went from 35% of the workforce down to less than 6%. So they started looking for new ways to organize. Right now, what they're doing is they're organizing independent contractors, home health care workers, and people who take care of disabled family members. They've organized them in 10 states already, and they've done this through getting friendly governors that they buy and sell.
Gotcha.
They organize them by setting up these Enron-style...
So they have willing partners.
Oh, yeah, because remember, they bring all this money to bear. I mean, they buy
them with the money.
They buy them, and they give them back money by letting them organize more people. So they set up these Enron-style corporations. And what they do with them is they then say, you're an employee of that corporation, and they organize them. These are independent contractors.
Well, okay, so you're saying with AARP, bring AARP into the
Well,
conversation.
it doesn't have to be AARP.
Well,
but
let's use them as an example, though, because that's what you were talking about out front. So let's use AARP as an example and Social Security as kind of the byproduct of that. How exactly does that, because that hits me right between the eyes.
Well,
they're going to try to make me part of their union?
Absolutely.
How can they force me to do I don't want to be, so how do they force me?
In 22 states, you don't have the choice. In 22 states, once a group votes a union in, everybody in that group is forced.
The group, who would be the group that would do that?
Could be, it would be, here's how they did it in 10 states already. They get these home health care workers.
Okay.
They target a small percentage of them that are pro-union. They send out some notice that nobody even notices.
Yep.
They get 50% of the people who return a ballot to say, I want a union. Maybe only 15, 16, 70% even vote. Then all of a sudden, 100% of them are forced to pay dues of that group. So you get a group of seniors together, and because they get money from the government, you could potentially unionize them if a majority voted for a union. Not a majority of those getting the benefits, just a majority of those voting.
This would have to go state by state, I would assume.
State by state.
So it wouldn't be a federal kind of edict.
And in 22 states, once the union's in there, it's almost impossible to get rid of it, and you're forced to pay dues, and the dues come out even before you see your monthly check.
You know, the fascinating thing about your book and the fascinating thing about what's going on in Washington probably isn't that new. The shadow bosses is kind of a reflection of history in a way. I mean, it's been around for a long time. Things we just didn't know about it.
That's right, and it's gotten even worse than that. They're looking at not only Social Security recipients, they're looking at veterans. They're starting to organize people who are food stamp recipients.
Okay, let's take a look at this. What you're saying is they're basically trying to unionize the country.
Right. They're saying that people are too stupid to represent themselves, and they're smarter than them. And these shadow bosses, these union heads, they're making more than the president. I mean, one of them spent $325,000 in a year and a half on private airplanes.
Well, it's all about manipulating the people anyway. I mean, we know that politics is pretty much that. I mean, it's tyranny instead of liberty, and you can throw those words around, but you know, it's really interesting. She's heard this before, and I mentioned to the last guy, the most profound quote that I have heard in a long time was by Washington, of all people. And maybe you're familiar with this, but I really was not familiar with it. And he was describing what government was, and in this case, be kind of like unions are, what government is and what government isn't. And are you familiar with the quote that he said, government is not reason. So there's nothing it does that's reasonable. And he said, it's not eloquent. It's force. It's like fire. It's a dangerous servant and a fearful master. So you can apply that.
Wow, that is so good.
That profound?
That is so profound. That is fantastic.
I know it. That's Washington before parties.
And what's happening is we are falling into the trap.
That's exactly what you just described. A fearful master. Because unions and government sets itself up to be our servant. They're never our servant. Their intention is always to be our master. And when they become our master and are out of control, they are fearful.
And Obama is the first union label president. I mean, he is 100%.
He is definitely in the union. There's no question about that.
Started out as a union organizer.
SEIU, yeah.
And SEIU is one of the organizations that's trying to organize Social Security recipients.
Very funny. You would think that they would be worried because the private sector is starting to drop union members, and that's all you hear about. They don't seem to be worried about it at all because they're just picking up the rest of the world.
Let me give you the big dirty secret. Every single million people they can unionize, that's $1 billion. That's right, $1 billion in dues to them.
Say that again.
Every single million people they can organize, that's about $1 billion in dues to the shadow bosses.
Well, so you got to be careful. You got to look out. What can we do to avoid this? I think that's the answer. We have the problem. What's the solution to it?
Solution's real simple. Nobody should be forced to join a union. Nobody should have money taken out automatically.
No, I know they shouldn't, but how can you avoid that?
You have to just be aware of it. The first thing they need to do is if they read shadow bosses and they like it,
right,
they should not keep it. They should send
Pass
it on to a state legislator, pass it on to a mayor, pass it on to a city council member, pass it on to somebody, because a lot of people don't have the opportunity to hear Chuck Woolery. And those who don't understand what's going on.
Yeah. I feel sorry for those people.
So what we need to do is we need to get shadow bosses into the hands of people who are making decisions. And we also have to make them feel the heat and expose them. I mean, what they should be doing is walking around saying, who's your shadow boss? Is it the government union heads, or is it the American people?
Right. Mallory Factor, shadow bosses, thank you for speaking with me today. I really appreciate it. And for clearing that up. It's an interesting problem we have to solve. And thank you.
Thank you.